Welcome to the Backyard Professor Responds videos. The other night in one of my response videos, I indicated that Richard Bushman has come out and called the Book of Abraham and the Book of Moses and the selection of the Book of Enoch within the Book of Moses. He's been calling them Pseudepigrapha. And this development is huge, man. This is significant. And so I want to deliver. I said I would show you the clip, but this is important enough that I'm going to show it to you right now up front in this series so that we understand there is not a uniform interpretation of the Book of Abraham. Literally, have you ever thought of it this way when you really stop and think about it? When we know about the backdated prophecies of Joseph Smith, when we grasp how Joseph Smith did, once the history was written, then he was going back and rewriting parts of it to fit his later understanding in theology or history. And he did the same thing with his revelations from the Book of Commandments. The Book of Commandments are not the same as the Doctrine and Covenants, not by a long shot. He even went back and changed the most correct book on the face of the earth, the Book of Mormon. I mean, he was constantly adjusting stuff. Well, when we understand the Pearl of Great Price and how it was composed, the Book of Moses, the Book of Abraham, the Joseph Smith history, the Articles of Faith, and it used to have the lectures on faith as scripture. None of the Pearl of Great Price has been unhampered. None of it has been unmanipulated. Every aspect of the Pearl of Great Price has been really hands-on manipulation and reworking and retrofitting stuff. And we are discovering more and more and more about Joseph Smith and his environment and the influential aspects of his environment, far greater than when I was raised in Mormonism in the 1960s and 70s. I was basically taught that Joseph Smith was basically raised in a vacuum. There was no influence other than his mom and dad. I didn't even hear about treasure digging and treasure seeking until after my mission. I mean, that stuff was just taboo. That was anti-Mormon stuff, so I never looked into it at all. So this type of, what can we call it? The maturing of our thoughts, as it is, coming to a broader, deeper grasp of a reality that really, truly, in some respects, almost seems so foreign because we don't even know what terms to use when we're talking about all of the other history that we never learned about. And so I think it's important because that claim cannot be made without backing it up. Now, I did make the claim that Richard Bushman did call the Book of Abraham Pseudepigrapha. And tonight I'm going to show you that clip and give you a brief discussion on Pseudepigrapha. This clip I'm actually using from John Deline's Mormon Stories, and he's with Mike from LDS Discussions and Nemo, but they actually show this clip. And so I want to share this clip with you because it's electrifying. Once again, this is in the study, in the defense of the Book of Abraham, I'll put it that way. This is a watershed moment. This is huge. This is really vital because we're now seeing the effects of the failures of all of the various theories that the Book of Abraham scholars have tried to come up with in order to save Joseph Smith from modernity, from the current state of Egyptology, because we can verify the modern state of Egyptology and their translation of the various texts whatever it is, whatever their nature is. And the history, our understanding of the history of Egyptology has been so much better refined. And it's true, we're never going to get the sum grand total 100% sure. That's not what we're looking for at all. There is nothing 100% sure in any endeavor on the planet. So, in a way, for the apologists to take that tack, and some of them do, as I will show, is really kind of a form of cheating. And I'm not trying to disparage it. I don't want to do any ad hominem, but Mormons are divided now, because now some of the really powerful scholars are coming out and they're saying, you know what, Bushman, again, he said, well, the dominant narrative of the church is just not true. And now he's saying the Book of Abraham, the Book of Moses, the Book of Enoch is pseudepigrapha. Well, that's huge. This divides the church scholarship. So this is significant enough. I want to share this with you. I think this is very, very much instructive. So let's take a look. Let me make sure my sound is up. Yeah, my sound is up. So here we go. Let's listen to Bushman.
Again, this is Richard Bushman, Harvard graduate, Columbia professor of history, very well respected, also Mormon Church stake president and patriarch, author of Rough Stone Rolling that the church sold at Deseret Books, admitting that, I mean, I almost like to think of pseudepigrapha as plagiarism or fraud, just injected back into a historical figure that's already died, basically claiming it's not plagiarism, but it's basically writing, like you said, Mike, claiming something is the writing of a well-respected historical figure when it's really just your own fan fiction that you write today. Let's hear Richard Bushman kind of acknowledge that in the case of Joseph Smith in the Book of Abraham.
From a modern scholarly perspective, Moses, along with a later translation of the Book of Abraham, looks less like a translation of the Bible than a major variant of a second major translation project in the 19th century, the recovery and analysis of pseudepigrapha. These scripture-like texts, now numbering in the hundreds, were taken seriously during the first centuries of the Christian era, when they jostled for inclusion in the Christian and Jewish canons. They were want-to-be scriptures, didn't quite make the grade, but still hung around in various forms. These are writings that had a biblical ring, echoed biblical themes, but for reasons both theological and political, did not make it into the canon, the Bible as we know it. They were called pseudepigrapha because they often pretended to be authored by a biblical figure and spoke in that prophet's voice, though the actual author of the writing was unknown. They had names like the Apocryphon of Seth, the Inquiry of Abraham, the Testament of Job, the Apocryphon of Ezekiel. Joseph Smith's books of Moses and Abraham and the writings of Enoch in the Book of Moses bear a resemblance to this large corpus of scriptures in that they came in the form of writings in another person's name. Joseph was producing pseudepigrapha in the very time when scholars were taking these writings seriously again.
Yeah, and
Interest in pseudepigrapha had faded in the 3rd and 4th centuries of the Christian era after the canon settled in, and revived in the Renaissance as part of the turn to antiquity for wisdom and science. Over the course of the 19th century, translation and study of pseudepigrapha became a major scholarly endeavor.
And I'm just going to say, like, first of all, the sign on that table says New Perspectives on Joseph Smith in Translation. I mean, that speaks volumes that they're having an academic conference with that title. But I'm sitting there at that table. I remember seeing Rosalind Welch and Jenna Reese and Terrell Givens and Sam Brown. And I think that was Jared Hickman, really smart people that are smarter than me, super well respected. And I'm hearing Richard Bushman basically say that Joseph Smith was making stuff up and just attribute it to Abraham. He's basically admitting this, and they just like look like they're sleeping. And I look around and I'm like, news flash world. Dr. Richard Bushman just called the Book of Abraham Pseudepigrapha, and everybody was basically asleep. I remember when it came out on Reddit, and everybody was talking about it. But I guess because pseudepigrapha is a fancy word, and because all these academics are sort of cloaking everything they're saying in this fancy academic language, and none of it's ever going to penetrate Mormon consciousness.
That's quite a way to put it, John. John Dehlin's Mormon Stories are a sensational way to learn about a boatload of issues, man. And this particular series with Mike from LDS Discussions, and he also has co-hosts Nemo quite often. It's a sensational series. I would strongly recommend you watch those. They're very informative. They do deep dives. They are inspiring me to do my deep dive and my thorough re-examination of this Book of Abraham theme, because the apologists are they're picking it back up again, and they're trying to re-up it. And so I had a good phone conversation with Brian Hauglid the other day. And he told me, yeah, I browsed that new BYU Studies Quarterly, and they're rehashing about the first third of it is just basically rehash of what we've known. He said, and then you've got a lot of stuff that you are going to have fun responding to, and I truly am. So now, two items I want to share with you to wrap up this pseudepigrapha theme. One of the favorite apologetic tactics, of course, is to try to find something anciently that Joseph Smith couldn't have known and then claim that's a parallel, and it's demonstrating that he had the prophetic insight, the inspiration, the revelation, whatever you want to call it, to translate a document accurately. And they've basically taken this same tack with the Book of Mormon, with the Book of Abraham, with the Book of Enoch. With the Enoch texts, every single one of the Enoch texts, I mean, we have like 6 or 7 different kinds of Enoch texts. There's actually hundreds of thousands of pages of scholarly materials been written on Enoch through the years. They were nothing in them is historical. None of the books of Enoch verify Enoch was actually existing as a human on earth. These are much later stories, millennia later stories about Abraham, written by someone between 200 BC, say, and 100 AD. Actually, the Hebrew Book of Enoch goes up into 400 AD, if I remember right. I've got to reread Odeberg. I've got it up here somewhere. So nothing in the books of Enoch establish Enoch as actually a real flesh and blood person, right? So all of the parallels that the LDS scholarship has tried to find with the Book of Enoch in order to verify and it's real interesting, because it appears to me that the only type of authenticity that Mormon scholarship is going to accept is if you can demonstrate that it's anciently historical. And so, in a way, they have such a limiting factor that they almost shoot themselves in the foot. But again, the Book of Enoch parallels just don't mean a thing when you really recognize that there is no evidence for Enoch actually having existed. The amazing thing is they are still in that boat with Abraham. Well, I mean, you got Melchizedek. Criminy, you've got Adam and Eve, Seth, Cain, Abel, Methuselah, the oldest man known in history, 998 years old, etc. All of that. None of those have any outside verification outside the Bible, especially when we consider that the the actual Old Testament itself, as it is that we have right now that we read, that wasn't even written and compiled any earlier than 1000 BC. And we know that there's research, Schwedewind and even David Bokovoy in his Old Testament text in his book has said that the Hebrew language, one, doesn't exist before 1000 BC, but the actual structure of the Old Testament didn't happen till after the Babylonian captivity. And that would be about 600 BC down to 500 BC. So for the stories that we have in the Old Testament that discuss Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Methuselah, Noah, Melchizedek, Abraham, Enoch, all of those, the best we can say is, well, they're just stories. And it's exactly because of the lack of information from the Old Testament that at about 200 BC, now this is when the abomination of desolation came, when the Jews, their temples were being polluted by John Hyrcanus and who was it, Aristobulus. I'm not really up on my intertestamental history yet, but this was a time when great fervor began to build, and on all of these ancient apocalypses of Adam, of Enoch, of Abraham, the testamentary literature just exploded for this 300-year period, 200 BC to 100 AD. There was a huge messianic fervor. Josephus talks about 6 different people that were messianic figures, got in trouble with the Romans. You don't mess with Rome, they're going to kick your butt. Nobody defeated Rome in the 200 BC to 100 AD era. It's Rome or death. It's your choice. And the death is not pretty. Crucifixion was a common method, and they did them by the hundreds. It was a horrifying sight to see the road between your village and the village that your mom lives in 4 miles away on both sides of the road, having hundreds of crosses filled with your friends and neighbors. You don't make Rome mad at you, right? So this whole era is a fantastically interesting era. The literature is quite interesting, but it doesn't give historicity. No matter how many parallels you use, that doesn't establish historicity, because none of these books could have known anything about Adam and Eve. Abraham, Enoch, Melchizedek, you name any of the paid, Noah, etc. What we have is legends and the stuff of faith promotion, right? So I just wanted to share a 1978 source that I thought was also interesting concerning pseudepigrapha real quick. And this was the world-class scholar, Christopher Stendall. He did a study on the Sermon on the Mount and 3rd Nephi. It was in this book, Reflections on Mormonism, 1970. This is the BYU Religious Studies Center. His conclusion after examining the Sermon on the Sermon on the Mount in the New Testament and the redacted form, the form in the 3rd Nephi in the Book of Mormon, he was saying that I've spoken out of the kind of perspective with which biblical scholars look at biblical texts, and I have applied standard methods of historical critics, redaction criticism, genre criticism. From such perspectives, it seems very clear that the Book of Mormon belongs to and shows many of the typical signs of the Targums and the pseudepigraphic recasting of biblical material. And that is what they do. That's their, this is like the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, right? Also, so the Targumic tendencies are those of clarifying and actualizing translations. Again, just exactly what Joseph Smith was doing in his translation of the Bible, too. See, even his Bible doesn't escape this. The Book of Mormon doesn't escape this. The Pearl of Great Price doesn't escape this. The Joseph Smith translation doesn't escape this. I don't even think the Kinderhook's plates escape this. So it's usually by expansion, and that's what we see, right? And more specific application to the need and the situation of the community. The pseudepigraphic, both the apocalyptic, that is the end time, the end of days, the last days, that's what they call the apocalyptic, and the didactic, that's a Greek word for teacher, didaskalos, a teaching, instruction. These tend to fill out the gaps in our knowledge about sacred events and truths and predictions, and they may be overtly revelatory or under the authority of the ancient greats, Enoch, the patriarchs, the apostles, or in the case of the Essenes, under the authority of the teacher of righteousness in a community which referred to its members as Latter-day Saints. Also, that's interesting, isn't it? Such are in the style and the thematic vocabulary of the biblical writings. It is obvious to me that the Book of Mormon stands within both of these traditions if considered as a phenomenon of religious texts. I would further see the Book of Mormon as an exponent of one of the striking tendencies in pseudepigraphic literature. I refer to the hunger for further revelation, the insatiable hunger for knowing more than has been revealed so far. And that is a keynote of Joseph Smith's treatment in his community. He kept giving them much more promises. There's further light and knowledge that Father promised. And some of his revelations would hint about further later ancient texts coming forth, a Book of Enoch, etc. And then the papyri that came into July 1835. I mean, that was like manna from heaven. That was a free gift for Joseph Smith to play it up for all it was worth. And man, did he do that. And that is part of what this series is going to explain. But even one of the greatest of biblical scholars said, well, the Book of Mormon does not qualify as scripture. It's just pseudepigrapha. Now, I remember this was over 10 years ago when I was an apologist. I actually used Christopher Stendall as a video of supporting the Book of Mormon. Pseudepigrapha, the designation, that does not demonstrate the Book of Mormon as a genuine, ancient, authentic, historic text. Now that I've learned more about it, because I was such a naive apologist, accepting only what the apologists were saying, now I recognize that John Dehlin is closer. Pseudepigrapha is someone who does not want their name revealed, but they want to get their theology across. So what they'll do is they'll write in the name of someone anciently whom everyone can respect. And this is precisely what we see Joseph Smith doing time and time and time and time again. So the Backyard Professor delivers. I told you that there was a video clip, and tonight I thought it was pretty important to show you that I'm not here to pull your leg. I'm not here to convince you to leave any religion. I'm not here to try to convert you to any religion either. I want clarity. That's what I'm after. And I am experiencing and seeing time and time again that the apologists want to make things much more complex and actually deliberately confuse us. My goal is to sift through that confusion and give us some much needed clarity. Because while I agree with them to an extent that there's going to be some complexity, there's no question about that. There is complexity in this, but it is not nearly as drastic as the apologists make it out to be. They are way overdoing the complexity factor because it's a necessity on their part. Our part is going to be to clarify it. And what this is going to do for us is it's going to help us stay focused on the real items that make all the difference. And yes, I'm going to have to take you down some rabbit holes that the apologists take you down in order to show you their methodology, in order to expose their assumptions, all the while they're accusing us of being the ones that have false assumptions, etc. But it is quite instructive to see not only the direction they're going, but how they go about it with what with what evidence, with what material, and how they interpret that evidence, and how and how they translate that evidence. It actually is quite a fun journey, and I'm very excited that you're all coming with me on this journey so that we can explore all these ideas together and so that we can learn together, because it really is a stimulating discussion, I promise. There's a lot of people who need help sorting out all of this stuff. I've been very fortunate that I picked this one subject as kind of my self-possessed area of authority and expertise, even though I never did get it. Man, I never even got a master's. I never even got a bachelor's degree, let alone a PhD, but I did a boatload of reading. I've been blessed with a decent brain, so I can think through issues, and that's what I'm going to do with you, to show you why it's important to understand and stay clear. So thanks for watching my Backyard Professor Responds videos. I'll be back with the next one soon.